Yeah. Level, 1, 2, 1, 2. How does this sound? Are we coming through? The voice of Muscatine. This is KWPC, Muscatine, Iowa. Welcome to the KWPC Growmark FS Ag Roundtable, hosting from high atop the Merrill Hotel on the shores of the mighty the Mississippi River, here in downtown Muscatine. I'm Tom Stever. I'm an anchor and reporter with Brownfield Ag News. We have an outstanding cast of Ag Roundtable members who will be introduced shortly. We have a lot to discuss in the brief time that we'll have together. First, this is National Agriculture Day. It's dedicated to increasing the public awareness of agriculture's vital role in our society. The National Ag Day program was started in 1973, and lest we forget, it is Pi Day. That's March 14th. 314, I'm getting some reaction from the panelists. Sadly, it's not PIE Day, but pi, P-I, or 3.14, and that's the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. Now that everyone is aware of that, we'll get on with it. And as I said, there's a lot to discuss, including U.S. trade policies, the ethanol. We're going to discuss E15. We'll be talking about that. The statistics released yesterday indicate that we are somewhere north of $7 trillion, with a T, trillion dollars worth of economic impact from food and agriculture. The latest Allendale acreage estimate has corn up a couple of million acres, soybeans down about 5 million acres. So what's up with the current issue of to establish rules for labeling cell-cultured protein products? The Trump budget caused a stir. It's cuts in agriculture by about 15%. Farm income, the latest projection has us up I'll take some more time, and we'll introduce some of these subjects as we go along. But first, we're going to go around this square table today and introduce our distinguished panelists. We're going to start with Chuck Spencer with Growmark FS. Chuck, introduce yourself, and we'll make this quick. We'll go around, and we'll get to the subjects here coming up.
Chuck Spencer with Growmark. I'm Executive Director of Government Relations, headquartered out of Bloomington, Illinois, but certainly pleased to be in all parts of the Midwest today.
Nick?
My name is Nick Badasky. I'm a corn and soybean farmer from Traer, Iowa, and I also serve on the Iowa Farm Bureau Federation Board of Directors.
I'm Heidi Vitito at JWV Pork, and my husband is Jerome Vitito, and he and I, along with about 80 employees and 40 contract growers, raise pigs in southeast Iowa.
Ethan Smith, agronomic consultant with Sinclair Tractor, John Deere dealership here in southeast Iowa.
Rob?
Rob Schmidt. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at True Acre Technology here in Muscatine, Iowa, and we work with farm technology and precision technology.
Rob Ewalt, representing the Iowa Soybean Association from District 6. I row crop farm. We have corn and soybeans and cow-calf operation and a custom hog operation.
I'm Kelly Brees. I'm with Frontier Futures out of Cedar Rapids.
And Kelly, if you don't mind, kind of sidle up close to that mic so we can be sure.
Again, I'm with Frontier Futures out of Cedar Rapids, and been a commodity broker for over 20 years and brought my talents over here to Eastern Iowa.
Very good.
I'm David Hansen with Growmark FS. I'm the agronomy marketing manager for Iowa.
I'm Dominic Snyder. I'm the ag specialist at the Iowa State Muscatine Island Research Farm. We do research on horticulture and agronomic crops.
Ryan Droletti, Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. I'm the farm management specialist for East Central Iowa.
Dwight Watkins with Community Bank and Trust. I'm a senior ag lender, and I'm in the Wilton office.
And I am Wayne Humphreys, this year's president of the Iowa Corn Promotion Board. We manage the checkoff funds that are invested by about 60,000 Iowa farmers.
And without any further ado, let's get into some of these subjects here that I briefly mentioned. U.S. trade policies, current back and forth with China. I hear hopeful signs about being close to an agreement with China, and for good or bad, at least we're close to some determination on those talks, whether they are positive or whether they are not. Wayne, I'm going to start with you. What have you heard about it, and what are your hopes in all of this?
I was in a meeting last Monday with Secretary Pompeo when he was in Des Moines. We expected an announcement. Maybe we were just overly optimistic. It turned out that there was no major announcement on trade except the deal was imminent, that progress was being made. Subsequently, Branstad, former Governor Branstad, now the ambassador to China, said that there was no calendar date set yet for a final agreement, or that infamous meeting that's coming at Mar-a-Lago. So the record is still spinning, and there is no definite agreement imminent, anyway, in my estimation. Things are happening there, though. We are actively negotiating. People seem to be negotiating in good faith. There have been no lulls in the negotiations, so that's why the entire trade, both sides, remain optimistic.
Chuck Spencer, what's at stake here?
Well, we have to have an agreement as soon as possible. What's at stake is look at our prices. Look at what challenges the farm and agricultural income and our economic picture for the next year. I think that most farmers and most commodity markets are looking very much forward to seeing some type of announcement made. We've got to land one of these trade deals. And the administration has been very open. I know Wayne just talked about how Secretary Pompeo's come out to Iowa. You got Robert Lighthizer, who's been visiting with agriculture groups on a very regular basis. They've been hosting meetings in the White House. Greg Dowd, the assistant ambassador for USTR, have been in a couple last month. I've seen him twice when I've been in Washington, D.C. and spoke with him. They understand very clearly the interest in agriculture and our economy. They know it's painful. So Secretary Perdue's even said that. But we have to have a deal. And I do know that in talking with farmers this winter, I think a number of us have probably heard While it's painful economically, we also want to see some reforms in the way the United States deals with China.
Heidi Vitito, there's a lot at stake here, especially for soybean growers, but let's talk about pork producers. You have feedstuffs on the line here. If they open that up, we're going to see higher soybean prices and higher soybean meal prices. Give me your thoughts on how you feel about all of that.
Ultimately, I welcome higher soybean prices. I welcome higher corn prices. I just need higher hog prices to go along with it. And just to give just a little flavor of this, my son-in-law and I were talking last week and about the relative deficit of corn or of hog prices relative to cost of production. And I said to him, this would be the equivalent if you had to sell your corn for about $3 a bushel every week to continue to have to be pushing it out to market, not having the freedom to hold it and not having a choice of a price. And even the futures markets are right now, they're on fire, but we've spent quite a bit of time with them not being able to buy anything positive for months on end, so it's been a long, grueling winter.
What's been driving the market, the hog market?
Well, the idea that a trade agreement is imminent is undoubtedly a key part of it, and in addition to that, the specter of African swine fever depleting China's hog supply has certainly added fuel to the fire.
Yeah. Anyone else want to address this, because this is a good issue? Go ahead.
Your listeners, all of us in agriculture, are whether we like it or not, we need to understand a world view of this trade agreement. We can measure pork that goes into China. We can measure soybeans that go into China. What we cannot measure that is a critical factor is the intellectual property that's being stolen, the technology transfers that are happening. Very hard to measure. And very hard to compare the apples of that technology transfer with the oranges of tons of soybeans and agricultural products. It's really hard to balance those things. You can imagine a trade negotiator trying to weigh those two things and make the two sides come together. Very challenging.
Rob Ewald, as a soybean grower, you have a vested interest in this as well from a market standpoint. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I'm behind the president. We're taking our lumps right now. That's me personally. I look at it, when this deal gets done, and I'm sure it's going to get done. I do not see dramatic changes, and I see a little bit of upward movement in our soybean prices, but I just don't see huge profit margins in soybeans. I mean, we grew a lot of them this last year. Every day that we don't have something signed, we're seeing dollars from China go down into infrastructure in South America, and they know where they want to get their beans from. If they sign it today, this is historically, we're not shipping to China now. This is normally they're pulling out of South America, so it's not going to take our stockpiles down that fast. They buy beans from us starting in October through January, February. So unfortunately, I don't see it being a big price changer for us. I think the hogs get to benefit greatly. The other thing is we don't know how bad this African swine flu is. You get little bits and pieces from different people that are going over there and hearing from it, and we think it's probably worse than what it's being reported. And if that's the case, they don't need as much beans. It's just that's the fact. So it's tough for me to get really excited about soybean prices going up where we're going to be profitable. I mean, we're seeing some trade things change in the soybean area. I was fortunate enough to get a non-GMO contract, which paid a pretty darn good premium and made beans profitable for me to grow for 2019. Now, how long has it been since we've seen a non-GMO contract in our area? I can't remember when the last one that paid worth a darn. So that tells me we're shipping to Europe now. We're gonna be moving a lot of stuff that way, and because all of our eggs ended up in one basket in China. But they wanted to buy, so you're not going to turn somebody away. I mean, that's why we sold to them, and now we just have to figure out where these other markets are that we can get into. I mean, that's where we stand in the soybean world.
Before I let you go for now, Rob, what do your planting plans hold true with what Allendale has said, that there are going to be fewer soybeans and more corn this season?
I am not changing. I'm keeping we're on a 50-50. When you start looking in my area, I farm the hills and the less desirable ground. But to grow corn on corn, I give up 20 bushel the acre, and it costs me 30 to 35 more in inputs. When you take that and you put it against growing first-year corn, I mean, first-year corn makes us some money. Second-year corn, it's kind of a push with the soybeans, and to be honest with you, I'd rather go to the banker and a lot less money to put the soybeans in. And then when this premium came along, you know, I was offered a $1.50 premium on non-GMO beans. And if we can manage the weeds, which I think we can for a year or two, then that took corn on corn out of the picture for me, because it was just there was more profit in the soybeans with that premium.
Let's talk about getting in the field. Ethan Smith, you're involved in agronomy with the implement dealer here in town and in other towns as well. What do you think? When are we going to get out in the field?
Looking at the
Yeah,
river,
I hear chuckles all around. Yeah, it's easy for you to say.
yeah, looking at the river out the window, it doesn't look promising for especially anybody in a river bottom situation. If Rob's in the hills, maybe it dries out a little bit faster, but I mean, for now, things are, you know, I would say still on average gonna work out weather-wise. Obviously, the fall fertilizer applications, whether it's anhydrous, dry, if people did fall tillage, that probably didn't happen in a lot of cases. So there's going to be a compressed window, even without the weather issues, on what's going to get done in the field ahead of planting. Or, you know, instead of 2 passes of tillage, maybe it's 1. Instead of 1, maybe it's none. Fertilizer, planting, so this year's going to be a little bit interesting on just how everything gets done in a timely fashion.
Yeah, and I just heard here in the last couple of days that our number of prevent planted acres will increase. Nick Podasky, what do you think? As you step around your own fields, what are your thoughts on that?
You know, if I could predict the weather, I probably wouldn't be sitting at an ag roundtable. I'd probably be calling my broker from my private island. But you know, generally things get planted. You know, it's the really extreme years. I mean, there's probably be some prevent planted acres in isolated areas, but by and large, things happen. I think to your corn on corn conversation, I think the lack of tillage last fall is going to make a lot of lack of tillage and lack of anhydrous application. That anhydrous is not the same price to anhydrous today that it was 6 months ago. And you know, there again, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know where everybody else is going to be for the corn on corn, but I can tell you locally in my area, I don't think it's going to be anywhere near what some of the projections are. I think most guys are going to, whether it's for economic reasons, even with low bean prices, or it's for environmental reasons, if they're already in a no-till or minimum till situation, they're not going to go rip up and change it all for 1 year. So, you know, I look for a fairly normal spring. You know, it's amazing how quick a week of warm weather can dry things out. So, you know, of course, I'm closer to central Iowa, and it's refreshing to see the lack of snow here along the Mississippi River compared to what it is as you get closer to the Iowa River. So we're going to be definitely a few weeks behind you guys.
Yeah, as I drove up here yesterday, I drove over one river where there was still a lot of ice flowing down the river, but you can see that the Mississippi is full, but it seems to be somewhat clear. We were talking a little bit earlier, David Hansen of Growmark, about the outlook, and you mentioned this yourself. Are we going to get anhydrous when we need it? And that was my question to you, David. So what do you think? What's going to prevent us from getting it when we need it and as we need it?
Well, we saw this whole scenario forming last fall when the ground froze back in December. We literally took an assessment of where we were for typical fall work versus what happened and actually occurred, and started to realize that we're in a pinch. It's going to be a tough spring ahead in terms of sourcing nitrogen. And so a lot of our members took positions and actions to be the reliable supplier for this spring by contacting and sourcing anhydrous from up to 50% more locations than they've gone to in the past. I know one of our members is going all the way to Enid, Oklahoma, to make sure that they have sourcing of anhydrous so that farmers can rely on that as being an opportunity to source. But I do believe we're going to see some shortages this spring. It's not going to happen at first, but you get into on 1,000 acres, you probably get the first 500 covered pretty quickly. But then after that, I think we're going to see the shortages kick in because of the basic suppliers needing to bring it up from the south on the pipeline system.
Just getting it in the pipeline?
Yeah, just to bring it in. So the farm gate's full right now. That'll all go out. Probably the next refill will come along, and that'll get satisfied. And it's that third round, about 10 days into the anhydrous ammonia season, that we'll start to see things break down, and the consistency of reliability will not be there like it was early in the season.
You know, if Congress, those Aggies in Congress they're talking about trade deals, but they're also talking about Farm Bill implementation. Ryan Droletti, I want to ask you about, policy-wise about that and what this is going to mean from a farm management standpoint. How important is this to get this Farm Bill implemented for farmers out there and for your clients?
So right now we're still waiting for regulations and rules to be written. What we have is the legislative language, and the legislative language says that it's status quo of where we've been. Sign-ups and a few tweaks and a few changes here or there. Otherwise, it's going to be the same as what it's been. What will change is how the different programs, especially on the commodity titles, change. We still have Ark County, the Ark County PLC. You'll have the opportunity to sign up, but all of a sudden we're looking at the formulas are still the same, but we're looking at a different scenario, a different environment that we were in 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, we had a majority of the state signed up for Ark County and corn and beans. Very few signed up for PLC, even though we had counties that looked like they would never trigger. Now we're looking at the fact that the Ark County program might not ever trigger a payment. And so now we're looking at going into the PLC program. That only triggers when we get below that 370 reference price on corn, 840 on beans. I hope I never get down to 840 beans. Looking at cash prices right now, I've seen some cash prices down to $8, which isn't fun to look at. But implementing on the Farm Bill side, it's going to be same old, same old. Where the really help comes in is the changes to the dairy programs. There are dairy farmers out there that are really struggling. They've overproduced for their demand side, and prices are suppressed, and we're trying to help out where we can, but we've had several reports of dairies that are going out.
And we have heard reports, of course, in the ARC PLC program and in the dairy program, most notably in dairy. I think that these changes are going to be quite, advantageous? What are your thoughts?
I hope that they're advantageous for the dairy on the dairy side. ARC PLC, I'm still waiting to see. I don't know if we're going to get that much payment out of it. Initial numbers that come out say we don't increase the deficit, we don't increase spending very much. And if you look at the last 5 years going into the forecast for the 2018 on the spending for the commodity titles and conservation, we stay at status quo basically because of the payments that we got this last year to beans, mostly on the beans. We only got a penny on the corn. But spending-wise, we're about the same level as we have been for support levels.
Well, let's talk about markets for a little bit. Kelly Brees of the futures trader. The reports that have come out, the last one that came out, we kind of got hit hard on because of big carryouts, both in corn and soybeans. Get that mic close to you so that we don't miss anything that you have to say. But what are your thoughts on that, and how are we seeing residual action on some residual effects from that?
Well, I think the carryout situation is going to be a limiting factor to whatever rally we may get, be it China export news or be it planning concerns and those kind of things. That's all going to be buffered when you're sitting here looking at the large carryouts we are today. Price-wise, relationships, typically we look at about the 2.5 to 1 beans over corn. We're right about there right now, so I think ratio-wise we're not real out of whack. I just think it's going to be hard to sustain and to encourage rallies with the kind of carryouts we have over our head right now.
Rob, I want to talk to you, Rob Schmidt from Trueacre. I want to talk to you a little bit about what you do. Tell me about the function of the company.
Yeah, so Trueacre was actually started around crop insurance, so trying to help farmers and help the Lee agency of Muscatine help them actually do precision crop reporting or automated crop reporting that started back in 08, 09 when the RMA approved that. Just continued to struggle to be able to really get that data, make sure it was good, get it cleaned up properly, and saw a lot of finger pointing going on there from people colorblind that weren't colorblind to technology. You know, every brand was pointing and said, hey, you have to talk to somebody else. We said, hey, we want to form a company that can take technology for the operators and make it be colorblind in our support, colorblind in all of our offerings. So when somebody has a problem, it's not going, hey, you have to call this guy, you have to call that guy, we can't help you. So we've taken that, we are out on farms helping from the cab through the planter with technology and trying to make sure that when you're out making that pass, whether it be planting and spraying, that you're getting the best possible pass you can. But then we've also taken it one step farther, again with that crop insurance, where we're trying to help that data, and we're working with some crop insurance carriers to where we're helping them to get the data, get it cleaned up, make the process easier to be able to use the data right out of the tractor, right out of the combine, and to be able to use that to do all your acreage reporting.
Access to precision agriculture, do you think that is, are we seeing more access to that for your average farmer?
Yeah, we're seeing more and more people. There's so many little things we can do that can show a really good return on investment with precision, where it used to be the entry point was pretty expensive and you didn't really see it. But actually, as we start to go into, we did auto steer, right? And auto steer, we just felt like, well, it could make us a little more efficient, but a lot of people didn't. That's the only thing they use it to make them better. As we get more data, as we get more information, we can actually start to figure out how to use that technology to actually get a higher return on investment and to be able to make their operations better faster. Whether it be from overlap on the end rows to planting through waterways, just even the amount we can save on seed, let alone the yield bump by not overlapping on end rows or overlapping when, on our last pass through the field. We can see a yield bump as well as a savings on our input cost, saving on our seed. And at $300 a bag, it doesn't take a lot of bags of seed corn to be able to see some return there.
It's been a couple of years since we have been hearing about concerns about data. Who owns it? How is it used? Are there still those concerns, or have we come to the point where it's not such a big worry?
I don't think we'll be out of that for a while. No, there's still concerns there. That's still a conversation that happens quite often with people going, yeah, who owns it? And we're seeing a lot of different seed companies and companies who are getting involved and working with some of your companies like a Climate Field View, and they're getting access to the data. They're allowing you to be able to get access to their product, which is a really good product, but then they're also getting access to your data. And are they using it for good or evil? We don't really know what they're doing with it. We don't think they're doing anything evil with it, but they are getting access to the farmer's data. And is that helping them or hurting them? I don't have the answer to that.
Dominic Snyder with the Experiment Farm. I want to get an idea of what's going on in the Experiment Farm, because it sounds like you've done some interesting things, especially considering the type of soils that you have around here. What's going on there? And again, get close to that mic.
So what we do is we do research for researchers and professors at Iowa State, and also private companies like the Soybean Association. We're going to do some variety trials for them this summer. But our soil is the biggest thing that we have. It's sand. We're the Muscatine Island sand, and we're just pretty much trying to do research for all the other farmers that have that same soil. So we do a lot of work with nitrogen trials on corn, doing controlled release versus urea, and also fertigating. And a lot of soybean cyst nematode is very problematic down on the island. So we have some private companies helping us with that, looking at different soybean varieties or seed treatments that we can do to try to control that pest. And aside from that, one of the biggest things that the farm's known for is the muskmelon. We still grow cantaloupe down there to provide for the community and to make a little bit of money for the farm too. And that's probably one of our most popular trials year by year. I have people calling me from all over the country, wanting to learn about different varieties of cantaloupe, which one tastes the best. Some of it you can't quantify on data, so we do a lot of public relations stuff. We have people from the community come in, do blind taste tests. It's just kind of how we get involved.
Yeah. Some melon growers that I know are really fussy when it comes to the difference between cantaloupe and muskmelon. They say there is a distinct difference, so we better make that clear at the outset, yes.
That difference depends on who you ask, because I have different people tell me different things.
Well, it's good that there's research being done on it. Dwight Watkins, as an ag lender, I'm sure you have to have some serious conversations lately about the status of ag and of those loans that you have outstanding right now. Give me a sense of what's going on in the ag lending business and the degree of concern that you might have.
Well, this past renewal season, which we're pretty much wrapping up right now, actually was a fairly decent renewal season. What helped us in this area of the state was our yields, and then basically the bean payment, the $1.65 payment that really helped us kind of put everybody over the hump. If you would have asked me in September what my renewal season would have been, I would have told you I was nervous. You know, it would have been a long season. Looking into 2019-20 renewal season, basically a year from now, if I'm looking at prices where we're at right now, yeah, there's going to be some challenges. You know, I've got some producers that have already been doing some marketing, did some marketing a year ago, Ford marketing. I've got some producers that are, you know, concerned. And the biggest challenge is, you know, we've got some young producers that were able to survive this year. Next year, I think, might be a little more challenging. One nice thing with the Farm Bill was that FSA, USDA finally recognized that they needed to up the guarantee limit. We went from 1.3 million to 1.6 million for guarantees. That's going to help some young producers, especially if we have to look at doing some restructuring and stretching things out longer than what a community bank can do, but what we can do with the government, and especially with some interest rate buy downs.
You have mentioned in a couple of instances that government programs, the mitigation payments, the Farm Bill. If it is it government policies right now that are keeping farmers afloat?
I think the soybean, the MPF is what really helped this past year. That's what took a lot of guys, brought the guys over the edge, as far as being profitable. Long term, I don't think the government program helps a great deal. In long term wise, I mean, in long term wise, crop insurance, is another, kind of marketing tool that guys can utilize. But as far as, government payments, things like that, we haven't hit those marks in a long time. CCC loans, the interest rates, this is probably the first year I saw a lot of guys, of my producers, take out CCC loans in a long time. And that's just strictly interest rate. With prime moving almost a point in the last 12 months, interest rates have raised where the government hasn't raised quite as fast.
Yeah, Ryan Drilletti, you were
I'm
your body language
right?
was
So I'm going to back up what Dwight just said. It's like usually from year to year, it's those government payments that will help me cash flow to get to the next year. But long term, it's going to be my cost of production numbers. And what am I doing to get my cost of production in line with what the long-term pricing is? As we know, we're price takers in the commodity industry. And so then we've got to readjust our cost of production and our numbers and try to take advantage of some of those markets and opportunities when they're there to be able to lock in a profit. We've got a lot of interest the last few years in grain marketing. Guys that threw their grain marketing plans out the window back in 11 and 12 when it just paid to wait. It's going to go up, it's going to go up, and it did. And now they're at the point where we need to dust off those marketing plans, and there's been a lot of interest in that. You're going, okay, now I'm looking back at how can I lock in that 10 cents, 20 cents to lock in that profit. Heidi's sitting over there going, I do that all the time. I never had to quit.
But another question, you said production costs. So when a client comes to you and says, "What do I do?" What is the first thing you do for belt tightening?
For belt tightening, I then send them over to the agronomist. Because it goes hand in hand. We've got to think about, what are your levels of nitrogen going on? What are your inputs that are going in there? I've had individuals come in and go, "Oh, we should all just go," or I had an individual in my office that said, "We should all just go organic." And it's like, why? Well, because we can get a higher price out of the organic products. And it's like, but do you realize you're swapping one thing for another within that balance sheet and within that cost of production sheet? So I would say that there's not one thing that is this is what you should all do. It's a matter of you need to look at your situation and understand, are my rents, am I paying too high of a rent? Have I got too high of a seed cost, my fertilizer bill? There's all those inputs that you need to look at, not just one.
And speaking of inputs, you mentioned cash rents. Have they gone out, or have they gone down as much as you thought that they might?
No. Flat out no. And you see the head shakes around the table. I call them the angry landowner phone calls. I've had some this last fall and this spring where the landowner calls me up and goes, "Why did my tenant just offer me a $50 lower cash rent?" And it's like, okay, we have to back up and go, well, what has it been the last 5 years? Did you go down any the last 5 years? And it's like, well, no. And it's like, well, that's why they're asking for anywhere from $50 to $100 lower in cash rents. And it's like educating the landowner, also helping individuals talk about communication. If there's some communication out there, I think that's the biggest breakdown we have on the cash rent side. No, I don't think rents have gone down as far as I thought they would have. That has to go back to with the fantastic yields, and Dwight sitting there going, in September he was worried. We had fantastic yields, and it covered up a lot of those high rents.
Yeah, it did. Nick Podaski, what is it? How do you cut expenses? How do you make ends meet?
I think the first thing you've seen in the last few years, after we kind of got through the high times, as Ryan mentioned, when we threw our marketing plans out the window, and our biggest problem was taxes, right? So everybody was changing equipment all the time, year over year, and then all of a sudden taxes weren't the problem. It was actually making cash flow needs. And I think guys figured out that they had grease guns and they could actually put parts into machines. And the first wave of what I saw for cost cutting wasn't the production, it was actually all the other surrounding issues. So yeah, we don't have to trade our planter every other year or whatever. So I think we've seen a lot of guys, they've become far more disciplined as far as minding their P's and Q's when it comes to the costs. And the other thing I've seen in marketing, at least in my area, after having their balance sheet look good, they're still asset rich because there's guys out there still buying land and keeping the land prices up, and the rents they've been stout. But the marketing has been challenging. There's been a number of people who've hired people like Kelly to actually just take over their marketing plans. And as an example, last year, a lot of my friends and neighbors, they were probably the most percentage forward sold as I've known them to be probably ever. And a lot of it wasn't due to, their own instincts, because we all have the senses of feed and greed and fear in the markets, excuse me. But having the discipline of having that third party come in and help them out, and they've recognized that they can grow great crops, but maybe marketing's not their strength, so they hire it out to professionals.
Is that something you've seen change in the time you've been in this business?
Yeah. I was telling Dwight that in addition to my duties with Farm Bureau, I serve on a community bank board, and so I get to see a lot of how a lot of other farms operate. And there's a number of farmers, and some are very large, some actually are fairly modest sized. But the equation's the same. You still have to make your margins, and that discipline on marketing. If you just recognize, look, this is not my strength. At a certain point, I can't be too proud and go broke. I'd rather just hire this out to a professional who can help me make money. And for some of these guys, it's the best decision they've made. And some individuals they'd be very open in telling you that they were very happy that they did that.
Heidi Vitito, from a livestock producer standpoint, you're working the number of head that you have is a greater amount than it used to be. Are your margins narrowing that much? Are you working on a razor thin margin on that?
I don't know how to use the word razor thin when it's negative.
Oh.
I mean, it's widely negative or has been for several months, and that's not unique to us. That's common in the industry. And I think it's always a little bit interesting to see the narrative go on about how bad things are in the grain markets, but you can have literal catastrophes happening in the livestock markets and essentially have minimal talk about it. So it's always about numerators and denominators. And we, as an industry, despite our great green screens today where the market continues to be up today, we have done a very good job of preparing for 2050 when we're told there will be 9 billion consumers on the planet, but it's only 2019. And so we've got a lot of product out here, and in the quest to produce a lot of product and make a bigger denominator to divide your costs over, you also put more product on the market. And given the in the pork industry that our markets are about 27% exported to other countries, and that our primary markets, which were Japan, Mexico, not that China was a primary market at the time, but when all of those have been impacted by disruptions of previously accepted trade practices, NAFTA went away and USMCA came in, or is kind of like coming in, I should say, it has created like the perfect bad storm. So it's been a real challenge.
Yeah, the USMCA, and I wanted to bring this up, but I will now because you did, is that keeping you awake at night?
No, because you can only stay awake from so many things. But obviously it's important, it's very important, and again, all the talk seems to focus on China, but Mexico in terms of volume and Japan in terms of dollars of exports are two very key markets that are not part of the China rhetoric right now, but that probably have mattered more over time, or for sure have mattered more over time than whatever's going on in China.
So USMCA is getting your attention, but so is a unilateral or a bilateral agreement with where Japan is concerned.
Well, with the whole Pacific Rim, because I don't know how long the work on what was the TPP or the CTPP or whatever the acronym was, but there were lots and lots of years of time invested in working to get that thing put together. And I am not disparaging the decision to go unilateral, but we're not there yet. And so in the meantime, we're getting our lunch fed to us by other countries that are selling there. But Japan and the Pacific Rim also have emergent diseases. Japan is battling classical swine fever, which is also known as hog cholera, and Vietnam has been the site of new African swine fever breaks. So 75% of the pigs in the world are raised in countries now that are positive for African swine fever. So this is quite a deal. And God willing, we will not join their ranks.
Yes. But what are you doing to keep it out? What have you changed in your everyday duties to make sure it does not come on your place?
I promised I wasn't going to say again, I won't sit by people who have been in China recently. So I'm not going to say that.
Literally?
Literally.
You
I did say that last time we had our panel, so sorry, Wayne. So, but I still stand by. We have, for example, we have the World Pork Expo coming up in June.
Yeah.
And this is the great confluence of all global pork production. And in China itself, at least according to Brett Stewart, who I think is probably one of the premier sources of knowledge about global meat markets, but he says that in China, the general level of awareness of African swine fever as an element in their food economy is non-existent. Like no one actually knows about it in China. And I've had other corroboration of that from people who have either lived or worked in China. In the situation about trying to keep it out of our farms, we've implemented more rigorous biosecurity practices. Wayne has family members that are growers for us. He could illustrate that too. I don't think any of them are exceptional, but it doesn't take much. It does not take much virus to be infective, but it's kind of a ticking time bomb. So one person had made the comparison to it's kind of like molten lava, that it might not move fast, but it wipes out everything it touches. And diagnostically, we don't, well, for one thing, we don't have vaccines for it, so that's another good reason that managing it involves keeping it out, not dealing with it. And so it's, managing biosecurity, keeping food imports that might be infected because the virus does persist in product, even though it is of no consequence to humans, it will economically be a huge consequence to humans if it comes to Americans. So
Just being careful, being on your toes.
you know the expression, watch your head? When everybody says that to you, watch your head, first of all, A, you can't do it, and B, what do you want me to do? And I think that be careful is a very confusing and inadequate message if all we say is be careful, because what does care look like? What does risk look like? And so continuing to evaluate threats, because there are threats where people have been exposed in other countries or exposed in other settings, but viruses don't show themselves readily, so you can't tell that it's there. Another problem about the disease as far as managing around it is because it's a slow mover, even though it's very infectious, you can do diagnostics and have those diagnostics come back negative, as has been illustrated in some Russian outbreaks. Have those diagnostics come back negative, thereby giving you confidence to move animals, only to find out that your herd was not negative. So there's a lot of motivation to observe proper biosecurity measures like changing boots, changing coveralls, wearing gloves, not wearing clothes that you would have hunted wild boars in, and managing your traffic.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Chuck Spencer, you were vigorously nodding when we were talking about trade agreements and the status. So I want to get back to that because we glossed over at the outset. We glossed over the USMCA. So how important is that to the greater scheme of things, to the success or failure?
Our largest trading partners are Canada and Mexico, and a lot of times that gets overlooked. And Heidi was pointing out things that we tend to not think about as much because they're not as covered as much. But it is very important to open up trade with Japan and join the ranks of what was the TPP, whether we do that in a bilateral or another fashion. And that seems to get second-tier attention because we tend to focus on what keeps getting repeated. And that's why it is good that the USTR can work on a number of agreements at one time. There are trade teams that are doing projects that would hopefully come to an agreement. And I know of a number of groups and trade groups and individuals in this room that have probably had the voice into USTR in this administration, clearly conveying that you have to put some of these, and I always say we've got to land one of these trade agreements that's floating in the air. We've got to get confirmation on USMCA. We're going to have work to do to pass that in Congress. They've been having meetings in caucus at this point in time with both the majority party in the House and the minority party in the House. We've got to see that pass Congress. It's going to take an effort. It's going to take the type of efforts we've seen in the past to pass free trade agreements, which have been vigorous and involved. And I've told people we're going to have to actually take the step of making the contacts, doing the outreach, and talking to people. I heard Ryan talk about communication breakdowns. It's the same way when it comes to trade agreement, our elected leaders. They've got to understand the importance of this, and so does this administration. I think a number of people do. What we have to see is the result. And that's what we're all waiting on, and you've heard that commonly here come back again.
You pointed out that Congress is not all of a single mind where these passages are concerned. It's going to be a heavy lift congressionally?
It could be. I asked the other day, I was fortunate to be on a call in preparation for an effort for USMCA outreach. And in past trade agreements, we have actually had statistics by the Economic Research Service of USDA in conjunction with United States Trade Representative Office, or USTR, where we would break down by congressional district the value of what the trade agreement would be. And I said, we need that again. If you really look and you think about what I just said, our largest trading partners are Canada and Mexico. There are provisions. Agriculture remained pretty much untouched because we had and have a very good agreement. Dairy had increased provisions for trade agreements that will help them in a very trying time. We had advancements on automobile parts manufacturing, which was a big concern. We don't talk a lot about that in agriculture, and some other areas that we needed outside of the ag industry. I think that it would be very clear district by district when you start putting the economic numbers out that it is a win for most areas of this country to have trading partners right next door. We have to unify as a North American partner here, even though we're different countries. And I say unify, not a loaded word, but a uniform and unified trade agreement to compete globally, because each one of us in this room and who is listening is working and competing in a global marketplace.
Our discussion seems to be going from place to place and from issue to issue, but while we're on the money lending issue, I wanted to take Ethan into this and talk a little bit about how this has been, how has Sinclair been affected by the tighter money that's around.
Right. So I know we had talked about this a little bit on the last roundtable too, and Nick had mentioned it too, where some of the first things that people have been doing from the high times a couple years ago to now is not trading as much. You know, we can find a grease gun, we can buy parts for stuff. So as an equipment dealer, we're seeing, you know, less new sales than, you know, the high price years of 13, 14. But part sales are more, service work is now, instead of instead of running a 1-year-old machine that's under warranty and everything works fine, it's all shiny and nice, now they're running a 6-year-old machine that needs new parts, needs service every year, all that stuff. So the equipment still needs work done to it, and as a business, you know, we still have plenty of business out there. It's just moved as to where it is and what people are buying. Mm-hmm. But as far as the financial side, I mean, there's, you know, as a John Deere dealer, we have John Deere Financial, but also Ag Direct, and there's, you know, People's Banks. I mean, there's lots of places that customers are going to get that as well if needed.
Nick knows knows how to use a grease gun. He knows where to get parts. But how much in reach is it to fix your stuff?
It's still well in reach for a majority of the things. Obviously, if it's engine electronics, things like that are more of a proprietary, you know, advanced system that even me as a, you know, I'm an agronomist, I can't work on a diesel engine in a combine really. I can fix a belt, you know, I can replace a belt, I can do the easy stuff, but that stuff is still, you know, more or less requiring a technician that has the programs and the computer systems to diagnose and to fix it. But in large part, it's still hydraulic hoses, there's still belts, there's still chains, there's still, you know, harnesses. Now if you rip one apart, it's probably harder to put back together, but a lot of the stuff is still the same. It just may be a little more complex, or maybe shoved into a tighter package and harder to get to.
Rob Ewald, is that an annoyance for you to try and fix your stuff and not be able to tear into it?
Well, a lot of people that know me know I'm mechanically challenged anyway. So, you know, yeah, we have a few newer tractors, and it can be frustrating that little things that you used to be able to fix, they're more complicated now, and it takes a service call, and you hate to do it because it's, you know, it's $200 just to get them to show up, let alone whatever they have to do, and then they never have the right piece, and they got to go back, and you're paying for all that road time. So it's frustrating. You know, I had to send a tractor in the other day. It was just cheaper just to have them come out and pick the darn thing up and haul it in, because like I said, I'm challenged. I'm not gonna work on some of this stuff, but our planners and stuff, I can still work with that. You know, in the combine, we operate an older combine, and I'm getting to know that on rather intimate terms now, because, you know, the way the economics are, we're going to have it for a few more years, you know. So it's a challenge. I know. You know, we always have these discussions at the national level about the information that's available to farmers to be able to fix their own equipment and stuff, and it's a fine line to walk, because, you know, these companies spend a lot of money in research, and they want to protect that research, and I get it. You know, I understand why they don't want to give out, but, you know, So yeah, it can be frustrating on that when you own that newer equipment, but for me, it's not as big of a problem.
I asked Nick about this, and I'll ask you too. What do you do to make ends meet?
Well, my banker likes it that I took up truck driving, so I do my best imitation of a truck driver a couple days a week, and you know, it generates some money, because when you do the cash flows right now, you know, we said last year we had opportunities last year. You know, before the tariff talk came, you had an opportunity to sell some beans at 10, 20, 10, and you put $1.65 on top of it. That was dang good money. And you had an opportunity to sell corn at good prices. You know, this year the cash flows are tight. Beans make me money because of that premium I said. Now that corn, I don't know what I'm doing on corn. I keep thinking that there's going to be a bump coming one of these times, because, and I use a marketer. I pay that guy because I know the most important thing I do in my operation is plant the crop. The second most important thing I do in my operation is market that crop. And to say that I can stay up on all of that is silly. I can't. There's too many things to be done. So I'm paying a guy, and he's frustrated too, because there hasn't been the opportunities in this corn market yet to lock things in. Normally we'd have, because we don't have a lot of on-site storage, we would have 50% sold, and we're nowhere close to that. And I'm concerned. I really am. I don't know when, you know, this weather thing's gonna, if we stay wet and cold, I think there's an opportunity for this corn maybe to bump up a little bit, and maybe that's when we make our sales. That being said, you better have all the beans sold by that time too, you know, because I think that just hurts our bean prices, because more people are going to go to it. But you know, we cut costs where we can. We're trying to. We are not building fertility on our land, and I tell the landowners up front. I said, we're not building. I said, we're maintaining fertility at this point. And for, you know, we rented a new farm, and it's a little bit lower and stuff. And I said, hey, we're gonna put on what this crop needs. I said, if I try to build it for you, I said, there is nothing left for me to make on this farm. So you know, those are some of the things that we have to do right now.
You had my attention at your imitation of a truck driver 2 times a week, because you've just advertising for a full-time job now.
Well, I tell you, I mean, well, you know, we're trying to utilize this equipment more. We have the semis, and they're parked for you know, 9 months out of the year, and so why not go and do some of it? And I tell you, there's a lot of opportunity out there, and you know, we have livestock, but we're not a large scale livestock, so I have free time, and I'm just trying to, like I said, we're in survival mode right now, and so you have to do things that you normally would not do to make it through and to keep the lenders happy, and you know, that's where we're at. That's reality now. So.
But I have also been made aware that, and I bring that up for a purpose, because there is a shortage of truck drivers right now. It's hard to get them. David Hansen, you were talking about how hard it is to get fertilizer from place to place. How much does this have to do with just a lack of people to get behind the wheel of a truck?
That's been an ongoing issue over the last several years within the ag community, trying to find local drivers who qualify with their CDL and with all the other testing that has to be done.
That's one who qualifies.
In terms
I was pointing
of,
at Rob Ewald.
Yeah, in terms of drug testing and all those things that can disqualify someone from participating in that industry. And so that creates a narrow market, very tight. And everyone's looking right now. I spoke with a gentleman last night who had a CDL, and I said, you need to call, and I gave him a list of ag companies that you need to get in contact with tomorrow, and you will be working this spring.
Be working, of course. Yeah, that's important. Kelly Brees, there was a mention of the markets there, and I could see you looking at Rob as a potential client. So, what about timing? Does Rob have a point here about get the mic close to you so we can hear you?
I think the key thing is to be proactive. To sit back and wait for the board or the basis or whatever to come to you might be the biggest mistake in that bunch. I think even when we're not seeing profitable levels, to go ahead and make sales, which insulates you from the downside, throw some option strategies over the top of that so that you can capture some gains if these other planning concerns and export concerns and all that get wiped away, and maybe we can find some rallies in this market. I think from where I'm sitting right now, we're going to need something like that to get this market to recover. And until we know that's there, I think a guy has got to be proactive and take the steps you need to in terms of your cash marketing, and then back that up with some other futures and option strategies.
And again, we're jumping around from subject to subject here, which is kind of fun, actually. But talking about the affordability of technology, Rob Schmidt, and we talked briefly about the availability, the accessibility of technology in the ag business. But what do you see? Do you see a demand for this in spite of a softened farm economy?
Well, yeah, as you were talking to Ethan earlier about new equipment, we're talking to farmers about how do we continue to update. Instead of going buying brand new, how can we go update what they have, especially like on their planters. We always tell guys, hey, the best planter you have is the one in your shed. We can go out there and we can make it run a singulation, can run as good of an emergence, good a stand as going out and buying a brand new planter for, pennies on the dollar. So we're going out and talking to guys consistently about how to help them do that, so that they don't have to go out and make those large loans on those large pieces of equipment. We're also, so one's planters, two then is obviously going to tractors, and we can put the technology on their tractors. We can put we can run RTK. We can put monitors on there that are as good or as better as what you can get on new equipment also. So we're doing a lot of that, and we're seeing people continue to come around and want to have those conversations, do that even more and more in this type of market.
When we come back, we're going to be talking about USDA having pared down its list of locations still in the running for the USDA's Economic Research Service and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Still hanging in there are Ames, Ankeny, Des Moines, and Council Bluffs. So Iowa is still in the running for those locations. We can talk about that when we come back. How about the weather? I've been getting texts from my brother, who's 14 miles out of Iowa, up in the north. We're in southeastern South Dakota. Water's coming over the driveway, which happens quite often when we have rain falling on frozen ground, and it just what's not going away is staying put. So we can talk about the weather too, and hit on that. You're in tune to the voice of Muscatine. This is the KWPC Growmark FS Roundtable that you're listening to, and we'll be back to hear from more of our guests around this table coming up. This is KWPC Muscatine. This is the voice of Muscatine, KWPC Radio, Muscatine, Iowa. Welcome back to the KWPC Growmark FS Ag Roundtable. We do this a couple of times a year. We'll call it the Biennial Ag Roundtable. I'm Tom Stever. I'm a anchor and reporter for Brownfield Ag News. It's a pleasure to be here hosting this on National Agriculture Day. We have still a lot to talk about. I want to bring up a statewide issue that has passed the legislature. It's waiting for the governor's signature. It remains to be seen whether Governor Reynolds will sign the so-called ag-gag measure that protects livestock farmers from infiltrators who are shooting undercover video. I'm going to throw it out to, we're waiting for Heidi to get back from the break, but I'm going to throw it out to anyone else who might have a thought about this. I'm scanning to see if there are any livestock producers. Are you a livestock producer, Nick?
No, but with the Iowa Farm Bureau Federation, we're kind of resent the name Ag Gag. It kind of puts a funny spin on what the real intent of legislation like that is. And really all we want is truth in advertising. If you're going to work for somebody, be a worker, we don't want people misrepresenting what's going on Iowa farms. And that's been the biggest concern is we all know how honest footage can be edited in whatever way for any political purpose or any particular gain. So I think that's really where legislation like that is intended to be. And I know the Federation has been in support of this current legislation, and we hope it gets through. And we hope we can, if there's bad actors out there, we don't support that. But we just want to make sure that the entire industry isn't painted in an unfair way.
I want to get your thoughts on this, Heidi Vitito. This measure, it's been changed a little bit because a court challenge brought down the one that was passed in 2012. So what do you think of this, and what are your hopes for this measure in the State House now?
Well, to be honest, I don't know the specifics of it as it has made its way through rulemaking or lawmaking, but I do know that we work very hard to provide good training when people join us at our farm. I also know that there are good jobs, if you want to use that phrase, enticing wages being offered to people to infiltrate farms and try to capture said video. And obviously, just as Nick said, it's not just can you catch somebody doing something, but can you capture an image that can be morphed into something and exploited for your own gain, not unlike using sound bites to morph a message into something that it was never intended to say.
That never happens.
I hope not, but yeah. So it's always a concern, but one of the best ways to try to alleviate the concern is to work hard to make sure that you give people no raw material to take pictures of.
What measures do you take in that regard? Because you have a lot of employees, how do you go about training so that there are no issues with welfare?
Well, first of all, in our own business, we have a levels training program, we call it, and when people come to work for us, their advancement for their first 4 advancements in the company is all driven by them passing these levels. It's not, you don't have to wait a year, you don't have to wait 6 months. You have to demonstrate competence in these areas. And we work in that, obviously, why animal welfare matters, but maybe more than that, why their own welfare matters. Because the more that we work with people to show them that we are on the same team as they are and that they and us benefit from the same thing, the less likely we are to have a culture that lets infiltration happen.
Speaking of livestock, the latest life cycle analysis happened. It shows beef production contributes a little over 3% to total greenhouse gas emissions. Rob Ewald, we've talked about you in the cattle business some, so I wanted to get your reaction to this. And you have a look of frustration there. Do you have anything to add to that?
No. We can talk about that, the greenhouse gas emissions, but when you look at how much more efficient our cow herds are nowadays than they were 50 to 80 years ago, as far as pounds of meat per animal that we're producing, and how quick the life cycle is, so that we're trying to limit that greenhouse gas. So especially here in Iowa, I mean, we have corn-fed beef, and we can finish those animals out so that they're going to market in 14 months versus grass-fed beef that takes 2 years. Well, I'm guessing that animal's not holding it in for those extra time, so they probably produce more, So we're very efficient in how we do that. The cows are producing, I'm not a dairy guy, but I know that dairy cows are producing a lot more per cow than they ever have. Therefore, that takes fewer cows that produce less gas. So we're much more efficient than what we were even 50 to 100 years ago, and we weren't talking about it then. So why, it's something for people that don't understand. They want to make themselves sound smarter, I think. And is it a real thing? In my mind, no, because we're doing things more efficient.
During the break, I want to bring up a gee whiz thing that we were just talking about during the break, and Ethan brought up that the implement dealer, the service manager, knows about problems on a combine before the producer, the person who is actually running the combine, does. And there's a service manager waiting at the end of the row when they get done, or end of the windrow when they come out of the field. Ethan, this is amazing stuff about how the communication. We're talking about communication, data, the transmission of this. How does that help a producer?
Right. So the systems, at least on the John Deere side, use a cell modem. So it's basically a cell phone within the machine, within the cab, and with the customer's permission, it will send data to us as a supporting dealer, so that if it throws a code about engine temperature, transmission, whatever it is, we'll get the code on the service side and basically have a way to know what's needed to fix that, and have the people in parts, having parts ready, have the, if it needs a new hydraulic hose, for some of these codes, the machine's going to stop at a certain amount of time after, if they let that temperature keep rising, the machine's going to shut down in 15 minutes. So we can call the grower and say, hey, did you see that code? Oh yeah, I hit the X, and I got to get to the end here. Like, well, this thing's going to turn off in 15 minutes. So let's, if you just want to hang on a little bit, we'll be there. But it helps the growers with peace of mind. It also helps some of the growers that maybe themselves aren't in the machine. We had this story about the grain cart driver. Well, if the operator of the farm's in the combine, or vice versa, they may not be knowing all the codes and messages and beeps and all that stuff in the other machines. So it's sort of a way to know that your equipment fleet is healthy, because they themselves will get those emails too if they want. So if a grower's got 2 planter tractors out and they're in one and not in the second, they would know, hey, this other one is running low on DEF, it's low on diesel, and it's needing a standard service in about 10 hours. So it's good information, but they can also turn it off if they don't want to do that, and don't want to send it to us either.
Wayne Humphreys, does it help you regarding from the standpoint of a producer? What do you think of all this?
Well, I think it's wonderful, and I'm glad the service is available. And while it may be frustrating at that moment to shut this engine down, an engine is the price of a new car. And so that's valuable. That's cost saving. It's prudent. It's planning done for you. When we're talking about somebody else managing something that you're not an expert in yourself, it just seems to make it's intuitive. It makes a lot of sense. And thank you for the engineers and the tech people that made that farmer friendly, made it digestible, made it acceptable, affordable.
Well, we have you at the mic, Wayne. I want to talk to you about farm income. The latest projection shows some improvements in the coming year, and a lot of that has to do with production costs. So you have costs weighed against prices here. So tell me, how do you see that, and what's going on? What are your thoughts on on farm income this year.
That's
You're all for it, right? Yeah.
I'm all for income.
Yeah.
That's a great question, and when those of us who volunteer to promote our product around the world, Tom, your listeners might be surprised. One of the first questions after we get done about the quality of our product, they ask, well, what's your cost of production? And all of a sudden the pens come out and they want to write down what the cost of production is in the United States for corn or for soybeans or for pork. Well, there is no cost of production. Iowa State may be able to come up with an average, and you may be able to use statistics to come up with what the normal cost of production would be, but every single one of us has a different cost of production. Most of it depends, I think, on where you are in your land ownership, in your land acquisition line on your balance sheet, what your cost of production is. Your listeners, if they don't happen to be farmers or landowners, if you own your own home free and clear, what it costs you per day to live in that house, your out-of-the-pocket costs are much less than if you just built a new home and you're paying a mortgage on that home. Your cost per day is considerably higher. And likewise with farmers, if you are renting your land, you know exactly what that's going to cost. If you own your land free and clear, you may be able to say, I can weather whatever the market throws at me because everything I have is paid for. But a true economist will say, yes, you can. You can cash flow that, but your return on investment is an opportunity cost that you're not taking into account. And so I try to explain that to foreign buyers and try to explain that to non-agriculturalists or non-business people, and they get that concept. And so we respond, we modify our input costs and do what we can with that big one, that land cost in our balance sheets. And most people seem to understand that. So an average cost of production is elusive. It's not real. It is an average.
Dwight Watkins, as an ag lender, what do you think of what Wayne has just been explaining here? It seems to me he puts it into a clearer picture anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now we'll see.
And I would have to agree with Wayne. Everybody's break even is different. When a producer comes into my office and says, well, what's break even for this year? I can go to Iowa State and say, well, here's the average, or here's what Iowa State's predicting. But every producer's break even is different. Depends on how much debt they have on land, how much paid is, how much debt they have on machinery.
And what's their definition of break even?
Right, and then what's your definition? So that's all. And then what's your interest cost? What's your interest cost in land? Depending on how many years you've bought land over the time frame, and if you've been able to lock in, refinance, lock that, or whatever, you could have interest rates from anywhere from 4.15 to right now over 6%. So a lot just depends on where that break even is at for everybody.
So, Tom, I'm also going to chime in when we think about
Ryan
this.
Drileti, by the way.
Yeah, thanks. There's the actual cash costs that are moving around, and Dwight brought up and Wayne brought up the opportunity cost, the economic opportunity cost, and then there's depreciation, right? And that's about the hardest one I would say that individuals struggle with is, how do I put depreciation into that cost of production number? And I think that's the one that's probably more moving and elusive on a lot of ends. And then we do an estimated at the beginning of the year, trying to figure out, okay, if I'm going to market ahead and sell some crop ahead before it's harvested, and I'm estimating my bushels, and then I've got to worry about actual bushels at the end of the year when I've harvested. So it's constantly moving, and like Wayne said, it can be elusive, especially when we think about depreciation.
Yeah, well, Wayne, I can sense that this is a frustration for Wayne, and that coming up with a cost of production for one thing. So, what do you think about what Wayne said in there? React to him just coming up with a cost of production.
You need to do it for one. You need to know where you're at. And Iowa State, we put out a cost of production number every year. I think the more important thing of that is we're looking at the trend, not the actual number. What is the trend doing on the fertilizer cost? And is my trend following the same trend that Iowa State is showing? It's more the trends than the actual number that I worry about on the Iowa State one. And then I look at my with an individual producer and say, okay, what are your trends doing, and why might they be different? Can you tell that story about why?
Yeah, Wayne Humphreys.
This is one of those areas, if you're not a gearhead, if you're not a tractor guy or a combine guy, you hire somebody else to do that. If you're not a marketing enthusiast, you hire someone to do that. I think that if you want to face the music and have your own true cost of production this year, I think you need to hire a professional. A certified public accountant. We have for 45 years used the Iowa Farm Business Association with benchmarks to show you exactly where you are with your farm size, with your mixture of enterprises, and that's the real world, folks. They're not going to lie to you. They're going to give it to you straight, and that is your cost of production today by a third party, disinterested but interested.
Yeah. And Dwight Watkins signaling too that he'd like to say something about this.
And I agree with Wayne. I mean, you need to know what your cost of production is in all facets, and you need to add family living in. Mm-hmm. And don't put in $10,000 for family living. If you can live for $10,000, I want to meet you.
What do you do next month? You know?
Yeah, I mean, don't be honest, because in order to survive in this economy, in this world, you're going to need to know what your cost production, and your cost production changes every year. And it will change throughout the year too, don't get me wrong, but you need to know what your cost production, because that also drives what you can market for. You know where your break even is, you know what kind of marketing plan you can do. And Wayne talks about benchmarking. You know, there's benchmarks. We work with a group that just came out where we can benchmark all our producers against other producers of like throughout Iowa, throughout the Midwest, and throughout the nation. And we've started utilizing that because for several years I've had producers asking me, and we've been able to finally, the last 2 years we've been working with them to bring something out, and we can do that, and it's very interesting to work with.
Dwight, it seems to me that we didn't hear about this, you know, like you say, family expenses, as you put them. We didn't hear about that in the past so much anymore. Is that something that you're talking about more to borrowers?
I've been doing this for over 25 years, and I've talked about it every year.
Every year?
Yep. The problem is that people just don't know what their family living is, because they don't keep track of it. And don't want to know. That's probably the bigger thing. Don't want to know. And the family living includes your toys, includes the boat, includes the jet skis, includes the Harley, includes the four-wheelers that aren't used for farming purposes. You know, it's everything. I was at a national ag bankers conference, and Dr. David Cole was there, and he talked about a producer that had a helicopter, and he was not going to give that helicopter up. But I mean, so you know, those are the things: the boats, the vacation house, the second home, things like that, the timeshares. Those are all cost of living factors that you need to be aware of.
And Wayne brought it up too, to hire a professional. So Kelly, I turn to you, Kelly Brees of Frontier Futures. How important is it to call on somebody like yourself to guide you through marketing?
Well, I think
and get close to the mic so we don't miss it.
I would say it's vitally important, especially if you look back at the last 12 to 14 months in particular. We see what, you know, when the first tariff situations came up with China, and we saw what that did to markets just right away. I mean, we had huge losses in corn and over $1.50 to $2 in beans just right away when that occurred. And we've spent a lot of time trying to get our way back there, and we're not there and don't know that we will. So I think that amplifies the amount of risk control parameters and measures that you need to take it as an individual producer. And when we talk about figuring cost of production on an individual basis, have an idea what that number is. And make that a basis point for where we begin to make a marketing plan from there going forward. And have a plan and make sure the plan is, number one, profitable for you, or at least as profitable as we can get it. And number two, that it is flexible. we're going to have a plan in place, but we have to be able to be nimble enough to move that plan if need be when we have things like embargoes and what have you. And that's where, using straight cash marketing without any backup from futures and options and those kind of things can make that very, very hazardous. And
you brought it up. Are we using hedging and that sort of thing more than 25, 30 years ago that you know of?
I would say it's come up. Has it come up as much as it should? By no means. I started in this business roughly 20 years ago, and the Board of Trade at that time still had this evil Darth Vader kind of image to it. That it was only there designed to collect margin calls. I think we've learned over time that having a professional with you to show you how to manage the risks not only on the farm but off, and rather than making cash marketing decisions and being done with those, have some backup, have some other strategies employed with that allow you to be nimble as prices move, which, as we've seen, volatility has been fairly extreme here over the longer term, 2 to 3 year period.
Nick Podasky, how much do you rely on a professional to get your marketing done for advice?
Well, I'm not going to brag that I'm a really good marketer, but I still do my own. I don't hire a professional. That being said, I'm definitely not a motorhead or anything, so this is kind of more into my area of interest. So I've followed markets for an awful long time, and I pick the brains of people way smarter than me, people like Kelly. I'll listen to interviews on the radio. One of my biggest tells is it's a good time to sell grain if you walk into your local elevator and everybody's talking about how the market's going to continue going higher and higher and higher. Or I turn on the radio and every market analyst is saying, hold on, it's going higher. Probably a good time to start making some sales. But, you're either a contrarian or a victim sometimes. So you got to take a position.
There are a lot of challenges and opportunities. I want to start talking about the outlook for the coming year, the economic outlook, and I don't know who to call on first in this, but if anyone raises his hand, like Dwight, he was hinting that he might raise his hand, but now he's regretting that. So
I was pointing to Ryan.
Oh, he's pointing to Ryan. Okay, we'll let you both talk. You can begin, Dwight.
I guess looking to 2019-20, I think I mentioned it in the first hour, there's going to be some challenges in whether it's livestock or grains, I think, coming into this year. We've talked about trades with Mexico, Canada, Japan, China, Vietnam. There's a lot of factors that need to come to play. My producers kind of have the same sentiment as the table here as far as the trade wars and things. Yeah, they hurt, but in the long run, we know they need to happen. I think if we can get through the trades and land a deal here soon, like Chuck mentioned, it will help. We have, like Rod said earlier, we have overproduction though. Are we going to see a huge spike in soybeans and corn? Probably not. Because we're going to probably have to chew through that domestically more than exporting, is my opinion. So.
Ryan Drilletti, how do you see that?
I'm looking forward on the outlook, and I'm just going, I hope there's opportunities. And to me, a volatile market has more opportunities to make some profit than a sideways market. Sideways market being the one that just stays the constant price the whole time. And everyone's shaking their head going, oh yeah, when it gets volatile, I can make some money. But then I also say, I'm going to point over here to Dominic because on the agronomy side, he's sitting there, he's already looking at me going, no, you don't. On the agronomy side, there are some things that you can think about as we look at the outlook not being the greatest at the moment. We're not looking at great prices, and it's being very depressed. And I know I was in at one of the co-ops in Cedar County here this week, and they're saying, yeah, farmers that are coming in, getting ready to put things in the field or getting ready, they're depressed. But I mean, there's other things we think about as well.
Yeah. How much does that determine what you're doing at the experiment farm, Dominic? Just this,
Well, we operate just like your average farm. The Iowa State doesn't own the ground. It's owned by a co-op of farmers from the area. So we operate just like your average farm, just we don't pay taxes and they don't pay my salary. So we just try to break even every year. And we still market everything. We still have costs that we have to, pay for. And some of the things we look at our seed. Are we buying seed that has traits that we don't necessarily need? And that's kind of, we do research on that too. So we kind of help ourselves and we help the farmers. And I've said this before, fertilizer is the biggest thing down there on our farm. If we put too much on early pre-plant and we get a bunch of rain, it all leaches away and then we have to apply more side dress. So we're trying to lock in those rates. That'll end up saving farmers money in the long run too, and it saves us money as well. The one thing that we really can't risk right now is our pesticides. If we start cutting rates and don't use the full rates, we're just going to keep hurting ourselves long run. We can look at generic versus name brand, which a lot of people are doing. But with that, when you switch generic, you have a bunch of other things you have to add when you spray too. So a lot of people are just going to have to start weighing the costs of their operation.
Yeah, and when you mentioned cutting rates on it, just so we can clarify, and I heard Wayne under his breath said resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So explain further what are the consequences to cutting rates?
Well, I mean, everyone knows we're having a huge problem with the R-word issues that not many people want to talk about right now, and a lot of it's from cutting rates, to try to save money, and that's why we're seeing all these new chemicals come out. And, that's why we're trying to try it and figure out, what locks in. And, can you spray something without getting your neighbor mad at you?
Yes.
Which is important.
So are you doing something in regard to dicamba-resistant technology?
We plant the seed, but we don't spray it. Okay. Down on the island, there's specialty crops everywhere. And so we're not going to touch it.
Right. Okay. So why do you plant the seed?
Well, we plant the seed in case someone else sprays it.
It's a self-defense measure, is it?
Yeah. And I know a lot of people are doing that too.
Yeah. Sure. I've heard that too. Are you doing that, Wayne? Mm-hmm. Yeah. David Hansen, Growmark, when we talk about the outlook for the coming year, what gets your attention the most?
A lot of the things we've talked about today are on our radar. Working with growers, producers, understanding the economics, their outputs, so that we can work with them to connect the dots to what's going to be the best track forward with their programs and plans and intentions for the coming year. So the challenge has been, I think it's been easy in the past to come in and talk about all the new technologies or the new products that will be good for your farm without ever considering the price. And now we're looking at the situation out there where it's about how do we define the dollars you have to work with and what's the best way that we can provide the resources to meet your needs, specifically almost on a per field basis.
Yeah. In other words, you keep an ear to this because you need to plan for it.
Yes. And there's pressures out there that we understand from our side and the customer side, and the more we collaborate and understand the full picture, the better off we are in terms of making the best recommendations for that producer.
And if we're looking at an economic outlook, Rob Schmidt, how do you view this, and what's important to you where the outlook comes in?
Yeah, so we're constantly looking in our company is going, how can we help operators be better? How can we help farmers be better and be better businessmen? Okay, everything's about that. We know that they really have 2, maybe 3 options right now. If they're going to sell a commodity, then they got to figure out how to be the lowest cost operator out there, raise the lowest cost per bushel. May not mean pour more groceries to it and raise more bushels, but maybe we can lower some things and have a better return on investment by not actually pouring more to it. But what does their operation need? Or they have to go out and try to figure out how to be a premium and get out of being a commodity, right? Are they going to continue to be a commodity? Which are they going to do? Or I think Ryan had said, hey, third thing is maybe they go rent the ground, right? So if they own it, maybe they should be renting the ground out. Maybe that's the best way to return the best return for them. A lot of farmers don't like to hear that, but that may be the best thing they need to do, you know, because we're emotionally attached to the operation, so we feel like we have to farm it. But let's face it, it may be better for them. They could probably return a lot more per acre right now if they would go rent that ground out to the neighbor or somebody else. So we're constantly trying to figure out how can we help them be better. We're doing a lot of agronomic studies. We are collecting a lot of data the last couple of years with the test planner we're doing. We're constantly trying to figure out how can we collect enough information and help them become better in their operation. We also know that a lot of our farmers still, you know, going around the table about input costs. How many of them really don't know their input costs? How many of them really aren't taking time to go, okay, my family operation, should they be getting a salary? Should they be pulling out and just paying themselves a certain amount instead of just living out of the farm checkbook and not really knowing where they're spending their money, okay? We're seeing a lot of that type of stuff, and we're constantly trying to figure out how can we help them be better. And then as we help them collect data, how can we help that data after harvest, how can we help that data make them be better in the end too?
Where do you see that going? How is data going to help them be better?
A lot of them have 20 years plus 30 years of data that they haven't really helped make them better. So we don't have a exact handle on it, but we're getting closer. So we're working actually with Mr. Ewalt here. We have a test planner. We're out running around. We're collecting a lot of soil data off of that planner. We're doing some variable rate testing based on organic matter. We're going to do some multi-hybrid testing on his operation. So can we put in a more defensive hybrid in areas that either have very wet soils or, you know, very dry soils? Or do we put in the least expensive hybrid we could find and put those around the outside rows, maybe where there's tree pressure or where there's wildlife pressure? Because we all see those on the outside on the map when we go through and do the yield and go, okay, we have a lot of tree pressure, we have a lot of wildlife pressure. We know that there's no hybrid that's going to stand up to that. If we don't get sunlight or if the trees are stealing water or we're getting deer in there, no hybrid's going to stand up to that. So how else do we try to change that? Is it reducing population? Is it putting in a cheaper hybrid? What is that? So we're looking at a lot of those types of things right now.
And you mentioned organic matter, increasing organic matter in the soil. I have been talking to a lot of producers who use cover crops now and are getting into cover crops. How much of that are you seeing, and is that the way that they're getting to that organic matter?
Well, yeah, that's some. Rob is doing a lot of testing on organic matter now, and I've been out on his operation. But it helps. There are some advantages to it, but there's also some disadvantages to it. I think the other thing we have to do, we have to be looking through our whole soil profile, right? We're not looking through the whole soil profile. We're looking for 0 to 6 or 0 to 8. I think we got to be looking deeper too, and then figure out how can we help make some changes at, 8 to 16 or 16 to 24. We need to be looking a little deeper and find out what else is going on, and then we've got to come up with a plan to figure out how we can make those changes. Because let's face it, mid-July, where do you want your crop pulling from? Really, you're not going to want it pulling from 0 to 6. You're hoping it's pulling from 24 inches deep, right? Well, what do you have going on at 24? Is it organic matter? Do we have all the P and K we need down there? What do we need, and then how are we going to come up with a plan to fix it?
And Rob referred to Rob Ewalt a couple of times, so I'll ask him: how do you go about increasing the soil health in general, or the organic matter that's down there?
So years ago when my father retired, then I was able to make more decisions, and so we switched over to the no-till operations, or strip till now. And we do utilize the cover crops. I mean, it's all about your soil tilth and organic matter. That's the key. The higher the organic matter, the bigger the sponge is, the more water you hold, and when you're in August, you need water. But it's such a slow process. I mean, you go no-till and you grow cover crops year after year, and if you're in a corn bean rotation, hopefully the cover crop's going to give you a little bit of a boost organic, over the years. But it's a tough one to increase organic matter. We did a lot of corn on corn no-till, and until when corn prices came down, that was not the thing to do. So we got out of that, But that's how we were trying to grow organic matter. I mean, it's such a slow process. We're really at a disadvantage to the South Americans. I was in Brazil and I toured down there and I watched them do 2.5 crops on the same acre in the same year. And this guy, they were growing corn, they were growing beans, and the corn did 220, the beans did 60, and they were doing a cover crop to boot. And he showed how over the last 10 or 15 years, he'd increased his organic matter by like 2.5%. And I mean, it'd take me a lifetime to do something like that up here. But when you have that
you know, when they have other challenges, don't get me wrong, I mean, but they have a heck of an advantage on that, increasing their fertility of their soil. You know, the mineralization of nutrients with that organic matter is huge. And we just, you know, if I can raise the organic matter on my farm by 1% by the time I retire, I'll consider that a victory. I don't think it can be done, you know, but I'm trying, you know. I want to leave it better for my kids if they choose to come back and farm, you know. So, but that's what we're doing.
And we got around to that by looking at the outlook for the coming year. Heidi Vitito, as a livestock producer, as a hog producer, what are you looking for? What do you think is going to be happening this year?
Well, I can say a genius thing that the market's been up 5 days in a row right now, so I'm happy. Yeah. As I listen to the dialogue around the table, I keep thinking about risk management. You know, we've talked about risk management as it relates to price, but actually managing your soil fertility is part of risk management. Managing your team of people so that when it's planting season, they don't flake out on you. That's risk management. All of those things go into it. I think it was 39 years ago, I started selling feed when I got out of college. And one of my jobs was to go out and sell beef feedlot stuff about which I knew zero. And the first question that you would ask producers is, well, what's your cost of production? And then crickets, nothing. And so then you'd say, well, let's just say. And it's weird that 39 years into it, with all the technology that has come about, I mean, we didn't even have hardly calculators back then, but with all the technology that has come about since then, why we're still going, well, let's just say. If you can calculate your cost of production on the back of a napkin, you probably don't have all your variables in there. And it's every time when I hear somebody say, well, what you need is a professional to do your marketing. If I were somebody's professional marketer, if they did not commit to giving me accurate cost of production information, I wouldn't market for them, because there is no way to win in that, because success in that setting can only be measured by, did I get the most money I possibly could have? And, you know, without any regard to how did that fit into your overall risk profile or anything like that. But the fact that it has continued to be a problem for almost 4 decades is really a blight on the something about production agriculture. It's like, seriously, we can't do better than that?
Very good points. Chuck Spencer, you've been listening to this, and I see you nodding vigorously for a lot of this. What does this tell you? What's your takeaway from what you've been hearing around the table?
Well, I think that there's been some very strong points about the uniqueness of each farm, its location, the environment in which it is located, and how you would then manage that farm. Cost of productions are different for each individual. Risk management programs are different for each individual. So working with professionals, land-grant institutions, entities of professional background, it's important. And what you're seeing here is it takes truly a team. You know, much like so many people are involved in their communities, and you're involved in both civic organizations, your schools, churches. It takes a team of people to actually have wonderful communities, and it takes a team of people to have very productive and profitable farms. And as the other thing we've learned, and I think a number of listeners have learned today, is that profit is not always the outcome. It's the desire, it's the plan, and you have to do everything you can to plan for that. But sometimes the Farm Bill gets you between one poor price or production year and on to the next. And that's the best outcome in an agricultural setting. And that is a challenge. That makes people frustrated, because the same amount of work goes into a break-even year as it does a highly profitable year. And it truthfully stated, sometimes more. But we've learned a lot from that. We've got to have the advancement, the progression. Data sets are getting stronger. I know that our approach in working with growers, what we're finding is the uniqueness, and of course I'm in government relations, so I deal with a number of policymakers, regulators, highly interested in ecosystem restoration, water quality, and then the word sustainability. And food companies now are entering their foray into sustainability very strongly down to the farmer level. And I really want to see this when I look at the outlook. One is that agriculture does make advancements, and we work closely together as teams in doing so, particularly in these challenging times. But I still see opportunity, and I think all of us do, and that's part of the heart of agriculture. The next thing is, when it comes to dealing with sustainability programs, water quality conservation programs, profit must be a component of discussion. A sustainable farm is one that is a profitable farm. Profitable farms can involve themselves in cost share programs, can install conservation practices. Early on, out of college, I had an experienced individual tell me, he looked at me and said, "Chuck, I've never cost shared myself to profitability yet." And I thought of that for a moment, and I didn't have anything else to say about the cost share programs I was promoting. And so that's something that we look forward to, and that I'm deeply engaged with each day I wake up. I grew up on a farm, still very close to farms, work in agriculture every day, and I still get as excited each day that I get up. I recognize the challenges exist, but you know what? We have more information, more opportunity in front of us to do more each year, and I think that in itself is exciting.
Nick Podasky, as a director with the Iowa Farm Bureau and also a farmer, tell me what you're taking away from all of this. As Chuck said, some years are profitable, others are not. What are you taking away from this?
Well, as long as we remain commodity producers, it's always going to be a challenge. You know, Econ 101 said the price of commodities always gravitates to the cost of production. So our margins are, by definition, going to be slim on average, which is why, as mentioned earlier, we need to embrace volatility, and we do. We curse the funds when they leave the commodity markets because all that money flows out and our prices go down. We never give them credit for stepping in because the Federal Reserve decided to cut rates and they wanted exposure to the commodities. And $1 billion doesn't maybe move the stock market that far, but it sure moves our commodity markets. So we have to be nimble. We have to be, smart enough, which I wish I was smarter at times, to take advantage of when things move and knowing my cost of production and cashing in. But, overall, agriculture is always going to have challenges. And I think Chuck's comment on sustainability is one on a going forward basis. Society expects an awful lot out of every industry, including agriculture and agriculture as a whole, and trying to clean up water, trying to do a better job with our resources, building organic matter, doing cover crops. I think they're great things, and they'll bring returns both to the environment and to your individual farm over a matter of years. Your problem is you've got a 9 or 12 month operating note that you've got to make this thing work. Otherwise, you won't be in business over a matter of years. So we as society, through things like the nutrient strategy and some of the state programs that we have to try to help promote these practices are good. But I think a challenge for agriculture, and maybe it's a challenge for Iowa State with some of their experimental farms or something, I'm not smart enough to know. We've got to figure out a way to integrate some of these things to a level where they're either not as costly or that there's a third crop opportunity or something to that aspect. For agriculture as a whole.
You mentioned society's expectations. Do you sometimes think that they're a little high? And I'm going to have you comment on this, Nick, and Heidi as well. But do you think they're a little bit high on what society expects about their understanding of where their food comes from and how important that is?
Well, as an industry, we never really had to worry about public relations because hungry people were our that was our customer base. Well, we're now into multi-generations of people who've never gone hungry. They don't, they have no idea really what hunger is. And that's really a big pat on the back to American agriculture because we've had society here now that can take for granted a cheap and abundant food source. And I've likened agriculture very much to the energy industry a generation or two earlier, where, people were very happy to get electricity, get gasoline. They didn't have to, worry about firewood and all this other stuff, and they didn't care about coal plants polluting the environment, whatever. They were so happy to have electricity in their house. Well, once it was cheap, abundant, affordable, pretty soon they started caring more about, okay, so where does it come from? What else is it doing? so forth and so on. Well, I think agriculture is in that same boat now, that people don't really know what we're doing. They can take for granted the output of what we're doing, and now they actually kind of care the impacts of what agriculture is, and they're generations removed from being on a farm. So I think agriculture on a going forward basis, and there's never going to be an end to this now, it's just going to be as a matter of practice, both as us as individuals and us as an industry, is educating the consumer about what we're doing and having, for lack of a better term, consumer relations departments, amongst part of our thought process as being farmers.
What do you think of that, Heidi? We've talked about public relations and how negative it can be very easily. So what do we do?
So Nick made mention of the challenge of being a commodity business. And yet today we've talked about how many different types of practices, both in cost-cutting sense and in better agronomy sense. And some conversations that we've had this year have been about people pushing for the notion that via blockchain or some other type of technology that the consumer in the store will be able to know everything, quote, quote, everything about the food that they go to buy. Well, the reality is there's stuff you're talking about here today that I'm in farming and I'm not quite sure I know what you're talking about. I'm not a row crop farmer myself. And so I think, well, how would a consumer possibly make an informed choice, which in turn then, you see people buy, well, I bought the organic of this or I bought the GMO free of this. Well, in many cases anymore, you only have so much linear space in a store, so consumer preference for something that has that type of a specialty label might just be because it's at eye level on a store shelf, not because they're actually making that, that they're articulating a demand for that. So that's one thing. Now, totally unrelated to that, we've talked about the frustration, the stress, the narrow to negative margins, and those type of things. And I've seen more buzz about this lately in print publications about the problems with depression in farming. Somewhere, actually, the word depression got said here. And one of the problems about all of us as kind of like islands unto ourselves is, well, if my cost of production is out of whack because my herd had health problems this year, I am disinclined to call up other people and say, hey, how bad's your number? Because of pride and because of a lot of other things. But yet, to the point of community and to the point of all of this, we can't get better without having people to talk to, whether they're paid people like consultants or friends and neighbors or peers in the industry. So, however, and how important is it when you think about getting enthusiastic about putting a crop in, that finally we have some days that aren't terrible weather? That's a good thing. But how compressing feeling negative can be in terms of not only how you make business decisions, but also your personal safety, your distraction when you stop at the intersection and you pull out, stop, there's something coming. And so it's very hard, but we need to do the thing to where we step up to the plate and reach out to people who are maybe hurting like us, hurting worse than us, whatever, because there's a lot of hurting going on right now.
Rob Ewald, as we approach the planting season, I talk to a lot of farmers. I said, what's your favorite time of the year? Some of them say the spring, and others, probably more, say that the fall at harvest time. But it's getting to the spring, that smell of new turned earth and getting life in the ground. What is your degree of enthusiasm as the temperatures start to warm up and it's getting time to get the grease gun out and get the planter up to shape?
Well, I'm happy to say that the planter went out of the shop 3 days ago. So
yeah.
Life is good on our place. I look forward to planting. I mean, mainly because the potential. The moment that seed's going down the tube, I still have 400 bushel potential. And then reality hits later, because of some of our soils that we have and stuff. But I mean, it's a great time. I mean, we're in the ugly time of Iowa right now. We're in the mud season. And we're talking about semis getting stuck on gravel roads carrying hog feed or even loading pigs out now. But it's going to green up here in a few days with this warm weather we have. The frost is going to leave. The mud's going to the soil's going to firm up, and it's just a great time to be a farmer. I mean, we got some challenges right now. We're going to get through them. We always do. And we try to help each other out along the way, because these are trying times. I mean, it's not something to joke about, but but planting time is definitely, it's easier for me to put the crop in nowadays with the technology than it is to haul it out and try to keep all the trucks pulling away. We like that part, but there's a lot more work that goes into it. The springtime's pretty easy, and I guess that's maybe why I like it.
I think for a last word, I'm just going to let Wayne have this as someone involved in production agriculture too. How you bounce off that and getting enthusiastic about the springtime and planting.
Spring is a second wind for all of us, and we want to make sure that your listeners here in eastern Iowa and western Illinois understand that they are not victims. Support your commodity groups, the soybean growers, the Farm Bureau, the cattlemen's, the pork producers, the corn growers. We move the needle. The world wants what we have. We have unique products. We have an abundance of products. And by supporting your commodity organization, we have world-class staff and wonderful volunteers who make worldwide decisions, and we move the needle on demand for our products.
What a wonderful discussion that we've had for the last couple of hours. I want to thank all of our panel members for being here. This has been very informative and has been uplifting as well, to get all of your opinions on this and to get all of your insights as to what's going on in agriculture. You've been in tune to the voice of Muscatine and the KWPC Growmark FS Ag Roundtable. I'm Tom Stever from Brownfield Ag News, and for all of us here at the Merrill Hotel in Muscatine on the shores of the Mississippi River, everyone have a good day, and thank you for listening to us. This is KWPC Muscatine.